Khan here for Seconds Out with Head of Boxing at 258 Management, Will Harvey. Will, pleasure to meet you, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Ayman Holmes. It's the first time I've actually met you in person, so yeah, we're here in Manchester for a big week. Looking forward to it, and yeah, doing very well.
Big week, good transition to big Frazer Clarke, who's out against Bogdan, Dinu. A lot of stuff happened in the background here, but important from your perspective to get Frazer out and firing this weekend.
Oh yeah, 100%. It was a nightmarish sort of 24 hours. So we found out. Booker had the issue Saturday night, late Saturday night. We found out about it Sunday afternoon when they all woke up, and at that point it's just a scramble to save his slot on the card. But all things considered, to actually bring in Bogdan at such short notice, an opponent like him that's boxed some really big names in the division, is actually a fantastic result for us. And in many ways, I think this fight is actually potentially more credible when you look at the people that he's fought more recently than the Booker fight. So, all's well that ends well. And just a massive shout out to Al Siesta at Boxer, who, like I said to you off camera, Dinu's been on our list for a while now. It's an opponent that we've thought could very well work for Frazer over 8 rounds. And for Al to go and deliver him inside of 24 hours is a massive credit to him and the guys at Boxer for the work that they've done there. So big thank you.
With Frazer right now, one criticism I think that's been pointed towards him, or at least the team, is the matchmaking to some degree. What is the situation with getting Frazer in and matched with fights, and what responsibility do you have in terms of that matchmaking role?
Yeah. So, we'll provide a list. It's very much a collaborative effort. Fundamentally, we have the final say on what opponents that Frazer gets in with. But we have a list that we have accumulated since the start of his career, and we've looked at the number of fights we'd like to have him compete in before we move him up through the rounds, and the sort of opponents that you want to have him in those fights with. Now, the reality is, particularly at the start of their journey, when you're fighting kind of not journeymen as such, but lesser name opponents, availability is a massive issue, fitness is a massive issue. So, it's not very often that you identify this is the name that we want to fight, and then that's the sort of person that ends up in the ring. But we will give guidance to Boxer, and then they go out and bring a selection of options that are very similar stylistically, size, frame, whatever, record. And then, depending on who's available, we'll make a call on it. So it's very much a collaborative effort. The criticism, look, as I've said this to Frazer a number of times, and he understands this. I think in many ways you could probably see it as a bit of a credit to Frazer and the level of expectation that's on him. But you're never going to satisfy everybody. Fans are impatient, and that's fair enough. And with someone with the pedigree of Frazer, they want him to go into big proper fights straight away in his career, and I understand it to a certain extent. But yeah, look, Frazer's boxed as an elite amateur. He's had 9-10 WSB fights, but in a professional ring with smaller gloves, with the 3 rounds under the lights, it's a different experience. And look, Frazer's skill set is extremely advanced, but you still have to learn to manage your energy, manage your output over the rounds and over the longer distances. You can't throw him straight into an 8 or 10 rounder for his professional debut against a big name, because you have to get your feet under the table in the professional ranks first. And so that's all it's been about, just getting Frazer settled, getting used to the rounds, and then gradually progressing him. And I think, look, there might have been criticism about certain opponents that have come in last minute. As we've said, he's had incredibly bad luck with named opponents dropping out at the last minute, and then your hands are tied, really. But the plan that we've got for Frazer, this is a very credible fight against Dinu, and probably we'd look to have another 1 or 2 fights before we're stepping into potentially a Wardley fight or whoever's British champion at the end of the year. So you'll see Frazer box for a British title in his 8th or 9th fight. And I think, when all's said and done, if you were to sit there and say to Frazer, inside your first year and a bit of being a professional, you're fighting for the British title in 8 or 9 fights, I don't think anyone can complain with that. So look, you're always going to get criticism, regardless of what you do. It's just part of the game. So we're used to it now, and we just very much focus on what we're doing, our game plan, and sticking to that.
Yeah, current Fabio Wardley stands at the British champion. You said they're talking about expectations. It seems like heavyweights get that level of expectation and matched up. Those matches are made in boxing fans' eyes as to who they want to see him with, and that match has been made in boxing fans' minds. Now, speaking to Fabio Wardley earlier in the week, he said that Frazer was someone they thought about as a potential opponent next, but speaking to the team, Frazer Clarke's team yourselves, that they maybe wanted more time for Frazer Clarke. Was that the situation there for that matchup to be made, that you feel Frazer maybe needs more time, or what's your side of it?
No, I don't. I don't think so. We never said that there's, we need more time. I mean, the reality is, I don't think the fight makes sense yet. Fabio's the British champion, and I don't think Frazer would necessarily even be in a position at the moment to box for a British title, just from a rankings perspective. Like, he needs to get ordered by the board. So that fight has never been presented to us as a serious option next. I'm sure Fabio will feel confident going into that fight. Frazer's equally confident going into that fight. It's going to be a massive domestic matchup, and so look, we're not shying away from it. They need to be made at the right time, but I just think that it was never a realistic possibility until probably looking towards the end of this year anyway, at the earliest, to make that fight happen. So. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what Fabio is saying there. We certainly haven't had it presented to us as a serious option next, but if he has always been the kind of the first sort of the first stage of Frazer's career, the first stage of his progression would be to fight Wardley for the British title before we push on. So we've always had our eye on him, but no, it's not been presented to us as a serious option for the next fight as yet.
Moving on to another leading light, that being Ben Whittaker, who's out soon, coming off of an injury. It seemed like pre-injury, Ben Whittaker was on the fast track. Is he still on that fast track? Do you want to move him fast through the rankings and get him close to some form of legitimate title in the coming year?
Yeah, and again, the fans will probably crucify me for this, but the answer is yes. But what people have to understand is that Ben has come off quite a nasty injury, which he had been dealing with and probably keeping far too hidden from the rest of the team for a good few months. He was actually carrying that injury quite significantly even in his professional debut. He then had the quick turnaround in Saudi, and it really kind of exacerbated it. So Ben has had to have some time off. Now he was still training, but he wasn't able to spar, and so his whole, maybe the last sort of 6 months, or since last August, really, however long that is, of his career, has just been focused on healing and recovering and doing the necessary rehab. He's now thankfully in a position where he can go back into full contact, which is fantastic news. So to be completely transparent with you and as honest with people as possible, I would like to see personally, as his representative, as his manager, the first fight just to ease him back in, because when you haven't been sparring, you've got to get used to taking the contact again. You've got to make sure that the injury is sound. And I would like to think that the first fight back is not going to be of a crazy standard. Maybe that you'd expect him to be taken in his third fight, given the first two performances he's had, just because he needs to get his feet back under the table a bit. But as soon as he's done that and he's comfortable and that bit of ring rust maybe has gone, he will push on. And Whittaker will move very, very quickly. He's not interested in hanging around. Everybody's seeing the talent that he's got. I think there's some great matchups there for him domestically. So, he will be moving at a good pace. But we have to be honest and truthful to ourselves and say that we need to just ease him back in initially to make sure that everything is functioning as it should. He's fit and he's comfortable.
From one light heavyweight to another, Joshua Buatsi is made some changes. He's left 258 management. He's now joined up with Boxer. What was the situation from your side of the view with Joshua Buatsi leaving 258?
Just one of those things, really. I mean, perhaps similar to the Lawrence situation, which we completely respect our side. I think sometimes when these fighters get into a certain stage of their career, with a certain amount of experience behind them, certain amount of earnings, they like to try and bring things in-house and go self-managed and take control of their own affairs more, perhaps because they don't necessarily see the need for support of people like us to negotiate their deals and stuff for them. Josh came to us and said that that's what he wanted to do, and again, and in exactly the same way that we had with Lawrence, we respect it. The way that we work at 258 from a very early stage, and you can ask Ben and Frazer this and whoever else was within our stable, we are very transparent in our process. We really do like the athlete and the fighter to be involved at every stage of the negotiation. So much in boxing throughout history has been the manager or the promoter coming to the fighter, very much keeping a distance between the negotiations and what the actual business and deal on the table is, and just saying, this is what you're getting for this fight, this is what you're getting for this fight. We really do pride ourselves on being quite transparent and having them involved at every stage of the process. So every negotiation that I'd done on behalf of Josh was absolutely involved in and knew what was going on in. So inevitably, which is a great thing for the fighters, after doing that I had Josh 4 or 5 years, however long it was, you pick up a certain amount of experience and knowledge. And he probably got to a stage where he felt like, I feel comfortable enough to be self-managed now to represent my own interests. And so he came to us and said that he wanted to do that with the next stage of his career. And like I said, we wish him well. I've got nothing but respect for Josh. I'm very fond of him. We're still very, very much on good speaking terms. So I'm looking forward to him getting back out on May 6th, really putting on a statement and pushing on, because I believe he's an extremely talented individual that just needs to get that bit of momentum back into his career, which we were always struggling with. And no doubt we'll see him at the very top. So all the best to him. I've got Frazer on Lawrence's undercard. I've got Whittaker on Buatsi's undercard. So it's nice to see those guys pushing on and doing well.
Fans perceive Joshua Buatsi's career as a bit of a curious one, because it seems to be quite slow moving, considering other light heavyweights have had their attempts at world titles unsuccessfully, but they've had those attempts. Whereas Joshua Buatsi, like you said, talent, pedigree, hasn't had that as of yet. It seemed like years back when Blake Caparella was talked about as an opponent, and that never materialised. It's kind of just changed maybe from that point. Then you had Kalic, which was a very good fight, but maybe wasn't expected to be that test. Dos Santos wasn't a great fight. No. Pascal came in. That fight didn't materialise. So what was what was the cause of the slow moving career during Buatsi's time with yourself? Is that frustration on both sides? What was the reasoning there?
Definitely frustration on both sides. I was always going on to Josh about the need to get momentum back into his career. He was part of it is unlucky because we had the whole COVID situation, so he only boxed once in about 18 months there. He had an injury just prior to the lockdown where a fight got cancelled. He was then supposed to fight Vlasov, I think. I forget when exactly that was, but he then had another injury. So there was kind of a sort of 2 to 2.5 year period where with COVID and various injuries he had either side of it, the activity just kind of broke down. And there's probably a couple of other reasons that he struggled to get momentum. His coaches, which he's had very, very experienced, very old school coaches who are brilliant. Virgil, world-class coach. Robert Kraken previously, world-class coach. These guys are guys that don't really like to take risks. They have quite an old school mentality in terms of how they want to progress the fighter. So there was probably an element of battling against them to kind of get the kind of opponents in that we wanted to, and maybe they wanted to take things a little bit more slowly. So there's a combination of things, but most certainly Josh and I both shared the frustration that we couldn't get him out and as active as we would have liked. But as I said, hopefully now that's all changed. He's in a stage of his career now where you can't be as picky really against your opponents. You're at the very he's ranked at the top of most of the governing bodies now. There's only one stop that we're heading, and that's a world title shot. So you can't be fussy about opponents now. He's injury-free. The boxing schedule is packed. So I don't envisage those problems being there anymore. And hopefully when he hits the ground running in May, he can push on and we can see him fighting, maybe for a world title inside the next year. I think that, if I was still with him, that would be very much the goal that I would be setting, is that you've got to have a world title shot in the next year. Otherwise, where is your career going then at that point? So I'm sure he'll kick on now.
Okay, cool. Just picking that up back, just fixing the light to make sure it's bright on your face. Now, the next question was, there's been some back and forth sniping from both camps. Quite surprising, actually, from Josh Buatsi's perspective, just because we haven't really seen that side of him. But he's left Eddie Hearn to move to boxer, and the crux of it is that Josh Buatsi felt that there wasn't enough viewership on his fights, and Eddie Hearn had said, well, in terms of getting you fights, we wanted you to take the Bivol fight, but you didn't take it, and there's a certain amount of money offered there. You kind of come across as someone in interviews and speaking to you as a calm head and maybe trying to avoid those kind of conflicts. But can you tell us, what is your role in when you see those things, or maybe in the past, and then also there's two situations about Buatsi's feelings of viewership and also the offer that was on the table too.
So what's my role in if he's falling out with Matchroom?
Yeah, just maybe in the past.
Well, but they had a good up until the end. They had a very good working relationship. I thought. Look, fundamentally, my job as a manager and a representative is and will always be to act in the best interest of the fighter. So I can provide Josh with my own advice, but the reality of the situation is Joshua is my boss, or he was my boss at that time. He employed 258 to represent his interests. So we will give him advice on whether or not you should take a fight, which promoter you should or shouldn't be with, but fundamentally it's going to come down to his decision. And then whatever decision he makes, what he wants us to do, we go out and we execute it. And so, that the Matchroom kind of his exit from Matchroom kind of coincided with his exit from us. So, we were involved at the start when he was basically telling us that he was wanting to leave, and we were working to ensure that situation materialized. And then during that process, he then went self-managed and basically kind of finished off that process on his own. But my job in that whole situation is to not mediate at all. It is very clear and black and white. Do what the fighter wants you to do. They're your boss. Your job is to act in their best interests and achieve the best results for them. So if they want to leave a promoter and you to negotiate a new deal with somebody else, you go and do exactly that. So my job is to do whatever Joshua wanted me to do. And then I forget the second part of your question. Sorry.
Bivol, the fight and the offer.
Yeah, the Bivol opportunity was a really I was really kind of it didn't affect me, the Bivol opportunity, but I was really upset that that fight never actually managed to materialize, and was never able to be made to happen. Eddie talks about money and stuff that was offered to Josh, which is correct. Money and stuff was offered, but fundamentally the WBA rejected the exemption, and they called the mandatory to fight Ramirez. So I guess that whole situation, that back and forth is slightly null and void. But Matchroom had made an offer, obviously, for the fight, but it was pushed away by the WBA. Anyway, so whether or not it could have actually happened in real terms, I'm not sure. But in terms of the back and forth, I personally, and this is just me speaking as a almost from an outside perspective now, I don't like to see it at all. I just never think, and this goes for all fighters, I just don't think it's in a fighter's interest to burn bridges in this sport. This sport is nasty enough as it is. It's as kind of cliquey enough as it is. And I don't see necessarily, you've achieved an outcome, you've moved promoters, that's fine. Or a fighter's left you, that's fine. But you never know what happens in the future. It's such a fluid industry. People come and go the whole time. People are moving broadcasters. Stables are, Matchroom has a great stable at light heavyweight, so there may be some fights that Josh actually wants to have against some of the light heavyweights in the Matchroom stable. Now, if you guys aren't on speaking terms, then I don't think that's conducive to doing good business. So, look, he made his feelings clear. Matchroom made their feelings clear. Their back and forth is their back and forth. There's not a thing to do with us. But I just think, as a general rule of thumb, I don't like to see promoters and fighters going, fighting over this kind of stuff, because I think burning bridges is a bad idea in this sport. The way that this sport is successful is when promoters and broadcasters are able to come together, and we'll probably talk about this in a little bit, but promoters and broadcasters come together and make the best fights possible for the fans and don't let the politics get involved. If you guys are at each other's throats the whole time, it's that much harder to do business. So I like to see everybody keep their noses clean. So I don't really like to see the back and forth personally.
Building bridges and chopping trees over in the USA is Anthony Joshua, who takes on Jermaine Franklin on April 1st. What was the decision making in terms of, and who did it come from for Joshua to, for fans will say, finally take himself out over to the USA? He was with Robert Garcia, but maybe didn't fully commit, it seemed, from the outside looking in. He's now doing that with Derek James. So how did that decision come about?
Well, it's, again, that decision, who he wants to go with, is fundamentally the fighter's decision. He knows better than anybody who's going to gel best with him. But after the last fight, which I think he actually did after the first Usyk loss. Went to America, went around a load of different gyms, trying a load of different trainers, sampling a few different bits and pieces. So we had organised that trip, and obviously Derek James comes with huge accolades with the other fighters that he's training. So Derek was one of the ones that we wanted to go and spend some time with. And then I think what AJ realised, and you alluded to it there, he really needed to, because Robert came into the camp last time, but actually I just don't think that the kind of the UK environment suited AJ that well, because he's still the superstar AJ. He still can't walk out on the street, without getting hassled and recognised. And so what I think he's really benefited from and really, really found valuable is the fact that he's been able to go to America where he's not as well known. He can walk out on the street. No one's going to hassle him. And he's just knuckled down with zero distractions in a very, very close-knit team of people that are out there with him, and done nothing but focus on boxing and improving. There's been no commercial stuff, very little promo that he's done over there. He's literally been there fully focused on boxing. And we often speak, but I barely spoke to him when he was in Dallas. A lot of our guys in the team in the office barely spoke to him when he was in Dallas, because he was just there. He was kind of isolated, really, but in a really good way. So I think that has really, really been good for him. And I think when he's come back invigorated and ready to go. Whereas before with camps in the UK, I don't necessarily think that that's been the case. So I think so far it's looked like a really good move, but it's a move that definitely is a decision that's made by him. No one can make that call for him. We can only recommend options and then set up the kind of him going around to the different gyms. But that call was made by AJ himself.
The question of desire has always been levied, I guess, later on in Anthony Joshua's career, to say, is it still there? Which we heard Anthony Joshua in his most recent press conference say, look, it's about money for me. And when people say it's about money, maybe there's a mentality switch in terms of your desire. I thought it was quite refreshing that he said money, but I think it's a fair point as well to say, is that desire still there from your point of view when speaking to AJ? Is it still there?
Oh, absolutely, I believe so. Like I said, I've not actually spoke to AJ this camp. I'll see him next week, and that'll be the first time that I've seen him since he's gone over to Dallas. Borrow a few little bits and pieces of conversation. But do you know what? Honestly, I have never, ever, ever questioned his desire to keep doing what he wants to do, even after the Usyk 2 loss, where he was heartbroken, and that changing room, the environment in that changing room was very, very somber, and you saw it in the press conference after. How upset he was, but the next day he was already talking about how he can get back to the top, what he needs to change, talking about maybe trying other trainers. He's already straight away planning what it is that he needs to do to get back to where he wants to. So when you see somebody like that, he's just gone through a heartbreaking loss, and he's already thinking ahead to what he needs to do to get back there. I've never, ever, ever questioned the man's desire to keep doing what he's doing, and he says it himself. He loves a pound note, as we all do, and that's what's keeping him motivated. And do you know what? Fair play to him, credit to him. But he's got more than enough money. Do you know what I mean? So he doesn't need to keep doing this. But he also just loves being a fighter. And that's why I think, again, as someone that has, a personal relationship with him, I don't want to see him fight very long, because you're very fond of these people and you don't want to see them stay in the sport for longer than they need to. But he's the sort of guy that will stay for a good few more years and fight everybody. And again, when you talk about a man's determination, and again, we'll talk about it with certain fights and fighters that can't make things happen. AJ hasn't never turned down an opponent. He's just Fury Usyk's falling through. He's fought him twice back to back. He's fought everybody that's thrown at him. He wants to take on all comers. He loves the challenge, and I think you only do that when you have a real lust for the sport. And I don't think that epitomizes anybody better than it does AJ. So he's still hungry. He stays hungry.
Good response, well measured. We'll get to that now, that conversation. It was, if you believe from what Frank Warren said, was setting the table here. the easiest fight to make, 50-50, Tyson Fury versus Oleksandr Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight titles. It now appears to be completely off the table, which is a shame. With boxing fans hat on here, that's the fight we all want to see. Tell me, you've been involved in negotiations like this. What goes on behind the scenes, and why do you feel the fight hasn't been made?
So we've negotiated at length with both Team Fury and Team Usyk, and I can tell you very clearly there's one side that's very easy to deal with, and there's one side that's very hard to deal with. And you have to be a rocket scientist to figure out where that falls. Look, and again, I'm speaking to you as a fan here because we've got no involvement in either side. I find it incredibly frustrating, completely demoralizing, to be completely honest, because I just worry, right, to be completely open, about the long-term health of our sport if the biggest and best fights don't get made and the best fighters aren't fighting each other. Because what other sport on the planet is successful where the best aren't competing against the best? And the reason why they're not competing is really down to ego. And it's not even politics at this point, because those you've seen. You probably saw the Frank Warren and Alex Krasik on TalkSport. You maybe not, but they were on the phone together at the same time on that show. There's not promoter politics involved there. They both want to make the fight happen. It's really, from what I can see, coming down to greed and ego on Tyson's side, And when something like that is holding up, what should be a really special and crowning moment for our sport, I just find it completely demoralizing, and it's so frustrating to see, and it unfortunately keeps happening. There has to be a way going forward where fighters probably are taking less ego to the table, and there's less politics amongst promoters. Just as a little side note, the argument that Tyson is giving, I don't think is unreasonable. He is definitely bringing more value to that fight, monetarily and commercially, than Usyk is. But at the same time, and I think people need to realize this, even when you are the champion and you're the A side and you're bringing the lion's share, in a negotiation like this, even then you still have to bring an element of compromise to the table, and you have to be willing to compromise. By what it sounds like he's trying to have Usyk's pants down completely and entirely. And Usyk, yes, commercially doesn't bring as much value to the table, but he holds 3 of the 4 belts that are on the line. This is a fight for undisputed. These are 2 number 1 best heavyweights in the world. So I think he's entitled to not have his pants. He still wants to be treated with respect and fairly. And so he compromised by giving Tyson 70-30. All they need is a little bit of compromise from Tyson in return, and this fight can get made. But his ego is getting in the way of it. And so, I just think we have to, as a sport, figure out a way where fighters and or promoters are able to work together in a more efficient way and a more kind of open and willing way. Otherwise, this problem is going to keep happening. And what's going to happen, and who really suffers from this? Firstly, it's the fans. And what's going to happen as a result of it? They'll switch off. Because I work in boxing, and it's my livelihood, and I love the sport to death. But if I'm a fan in this situation, I think boxing's a fucking joke. It's embarrassing. I'll go and watch UFC. Because guess what? In the UFC, the best fight the best like that. So I think it's a real actual, even outside of this Fury Usyk thing, which is a mess, because you've seen it with Spence Crawford as well. There's a number of other examples. Mayweather Pacquiao was over marinated. Brooke Khan over marinated. So there's a number of different examples for it, but I think as a sport, it's something we really need to look at. Otherwise, long term, I fear, for the popularity and the number of people that are going to be tuning in, because it's just become a bit of a farce otherwise.
Yeah, I think you've summed up, speaking a lot there, public opinion on this subject. Alex Krasik spoke to Danny Flexen here. He also spoke to IFL in the aftermath of the fight now being off. And one of the interesting things he said was Usyk would have been earning 3 times less than what he'd earned against Anthony Joshua, which kind of, you've dealt with Tyson Fury. Is he that level of draw? Is that what kind of helps to scupper a deal because there's not that money or extra money to play with and give that leeway here? Is that the case, you feel, as a strong part to making this fight fall apart?
So Krasik said that for the 70-30 split, Usyk was only 3 times less than okay. Potentially. I mean, Tyson is a big draw, but I still don't think he's as big a draw as Anthony Joshua is. You know, from a buys perspective, from an eyes perspective. So, you know, I don't think Tyson is as big a draw as he says he is. But like I said, I'm not even sure with Tyson it was necessarily about the money that he wanted to earn in the 70-30 split. Like, he's you know, he's quite a volatile character, and part of me almost thinks that it was more literally purely just an ego thing, that he wanted to feel like he'd completely had those guys over a barrel, like, because again he's incredibly wealthy. I don't know if an extra few million quid here or there makes much of a difference. So look, yeah, I don't know. I've not been involved in negotiations in an intimate way, so I'm not sure how the numbers would add up. But it doesn't surprise me for if Krasik says that Usyk was going to be earning 3 times less, even with that split, because I don't think that Tyson is as big a draw as AJ is, even still. So maybe Tyson needs to remember that a bit.
Like you mentioned, you've dealt with both teams before. Dealing with both teams, we want to see Joshua and Tyson Fury eventually fight each other. Eddie Hearn seems to think this might open the door for those two to finally clash. Maybe there's not a lot of confidence in that, but look, I'm speaking to the guy that works with Joshua very closely. Will we see that fight soon between Tyson Fury and Joshua?
Look, who knows? This is boxing, right? Like, to try and predict what's happening in 6 months is virtually impossible. From our side, we've tried to make this fight happen a number of times, and I think have acted reasonably on every single time that we've come to the table. The last time, at the end of last year, was just a complete joke, and I think people can probably see now that it's quite clear that Tyson never really intended on making that fight happen, just with the artificial deadlines he was setting and the nonsense he was coming out with, compared to the amount of time that they've given even Usyk now to try and make this fight happen. So I still absolutely firmly believe that fight will happen one day. What I don't want to happen is that it's one of those ones, again, talking about Brooke Khan, for example, which is over marinated and it doesn't happen at its absolute peak. So again, you haven't got to ask AJ twice. Anybody that you put forward to him, he will genuinely, the God's honest truth is, say yes, take that fight, no problem. So there's no problem on AJ's side. We're pretty easy to deal with from a negotiation standpoint. We just want to be fair, you know. So from what I can see, the only person that stops that fight from happening is Tyson. But I believe that Tyson wants it as well. The only thing that I'm scared of now is that, say we did go into these conversations in the summer, for example, I dread to think what the hell kind of demands Tyson's going to be making, you know, on AJ. And this is what, again, when I'm going back to that point where if these fights are going to get made, Tyson has to understand that there still needs to be an element of compromise from his side. You know, you can't have every single thing your own way. So look, I believe that fight still will happen, most definitely. Does it happen this summer, this year? I'd love to say yes, but you know, who knows the way that the world goes. So we'll have to just wait and see. But most definitely before they retire, that fight's going to happen.
Finally, I'll leave off with, and retirement is a good word, Derek Chisora. Last seen in the ring against Tyson Fury, retirement was brought into question again. At the moment it seems to be he's having a bit of fun doing some promotional work over in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. I've heard one or two things about him potentially fighting again, but what is Derek Chisora's next steps? Yeah. Will we see him back in the ring?
Look, again, time will tell. We'll have to wait and see. Fundamentally, that's going to be Derek's decision and Derek's decision only to make. You know, one thing that we've done since his last fight in December is keep him as active as possible and as busy as possible with stuff that's not necessarily involved with him being in the ring. I think, like you said, like you alluded to, the Saudi show where he was, you know, there was a deal done for him to essentially act as a kind of promoter, ambassador for that show and stuff, is something that he really, really enjoyed. You know, we're setting up a podcast for him and trying to get a book off the ground. So our main focus since that December bout has been to just generate opportunities for Derek outside of, not outside of boxing, but outside of the ring and involved with him actually fighting. But as I said, and as I always say, the fighters are the boss, and whatever the fighter wants to do, the fighter is going to go and do. So if Derek comes to us and says that he wants to fight again, then look, that's a conversation that we have to have as a team, and we see where we go. Like as I've said to you, I've when you have a personal relationship with these guys, and it's no reflection on like their ability to still compete or whatever, but I always like to see boxers get in and get out as quickly as possible and not hang around longer than they need to. But I can't make that decision for Derek, so whatever he wants to do, he will go and do. As yet, he hasn't said anything to us about wanting to get back in the ring or wanting to fight, officially. So we'll have to just see how it plays out. But I'm loving seeing the stuff that he's doing out in Saudi. I've seen the stuff where he was compared to Salt Bae, because have you seen that? Because he was with everybody. He was getting pictures with everybody, which I thought was amazing. So he's such a wonderful character, Derek. He's so entertaining and so engaging that I actually think there's so much stuff that you can do after boxing. To keep himself busy and to have a career for himself, because I think he's the sort of character that people really warm to, and he's actually very engaging and fun to watch. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
A Derek Chisora podcast sounds like a must-watch.
Right, I think that's a great idea. The guest that we could get on there, because he's a very well-connected man, Derek. He makes friends with everybody. So yeah, we'll have an announcement on that shortly. But yeah, that's exciting.
Looking forward to the announcement. Looking forward to seeing Big Fraze back in the ring this weekend. Will, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for speaking to Seconds Out. Speak again soon, sir.
Sounds good, my man. Thank you very much.
Cheers.